Forum today, Chair, but I'd just like to take the opportunity to introduce the new Democratic Services representative supporting the meeting. That will be Luke Dixon, who's obviously replacing Andre, who after some internal reallocation, I think is the term. Luke will be supported by Leslie today in terms of the initial meeting. Luke, would you just like to introduce yourselves and explain the context of today's meeting? Just in terms of some external guests.
No problem. I'm Luke. I'm a part of the Democratic Services team, and I'll be taking over from Andrea. And the Facts Overview and Scrutiny Committee have been invited today just to observe, but not to participate. Thank you.
Well, welcome, Luke, on behalf of Schools Forum.
I should have also taken the opportunity, apologies, Chair, just to remind everybody that the Schools Forum is a public meeting. The papers will be shared in the public domain, and a recording of this morning's meeting will be made live via YouTube this afternoon.
Yes, I think we got to the dizzy heights of 5 views, didn't we, for one of the previous meetings?
Yes, I'm not setting myself up as a YouTuber just yet, I don't think.
Okay, so next move on to apologies for absence. Are there any apologies for absence?
I've had apologies from Abigail Russell, Victoria McLeod, and Sarah Smith.
Okay, thank you, Luke. Next item is declarations of interest, if any, and just a reminder to either disclose any declarations of interest in advance, or if it becomes apparent during an item that you have an interest, just so it can be recorded, please. Okay, if we move on to minutes of the previous meeting and any matters arising. The previous meeting was in July, obviously because of the change of government and the delay in terms of information about the NFF, etc. I have to say thanks to Graham for chairing it in my absence. So we'll just go through each page, and if there's anything to amend or anything arising, just please let me know. So if we start on page 3, page 4, page 5, page 6,
just one point I will make in terms of page 6. Again, I should submit apologies at this point on behalf of Sue, who unfortunately can't make today's meeting.
Okay, thanks, Bruce. And on page 7. Eight. And 9. Okay, well, is everyone happy to accept those minutes as a true record of the meeting?
True record, Chair.
Thank you very much, Graham. Okay, so we'll move on to the first substantive item, which is two items of communication. First, the high needs, the recent high needs committee meeting, and I have to say, thanks to Graham for chairing that, and thanks for so many people attending that, because I think actually the discussion we had there will be particularly helpful for items 7 and 8 later on, and the fact that we had so many members of Schools Forum attending was great. I don't know if you want to say anything, Graham. The only correction I've got is it was the 14th of November rather than the 14th of October.
Yeah, I mean, yes, yeah, quite agree. No, I mean, it was a very good meeting, and thanks for obviously for David Street for his presentation as well. Excellent there. And obviously, I believe we could still got some of that to go through. As I said, I'm very sad I have to come yet again to Forum to ask for a transfer of money. But as you can see very clearly from the number of children that now have educational care plan in Northumberland and still climbing, I think we'll be looking at this for years to come. So, yeah. So this is the draft minutes and everything like that, obviously, for presentation today. And obviously, at our next meeting, we'll sign them off as well. So it's for information. Thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Graham. Yeah, I mean, I think when Audrey asked me to consider chairing Schools Forum, we had quite a robust discussion about the focus of Schools Forum shifting from the NFF because we were there in terms of that to focus on how we deal with the the issue of insufficient funding for high needs. So no doubt that's going to dominate our business for the foreseeable future. Just add a little bit to that. Bruce, do you want to say anything about the F40, the public accounts submission?
I'm just conscious Graham has got his hand up with them. Graham Atkins,
sorry,
Chair.
I'll have to enlarge my screen. Sorry, Graham.
That's all right.
Graham.
No,
that's fine. Thanks, Bruce, and thanks, Alan. Yeah, just in relation to the minutes of the high needs meeting and on what page was it? I think it's page 13 of the pack. In relation to the intended disapplication of a further 0.5% of the fact that there's going to be a deliberation on that schools forum. I remember asking if we could see the impact of that further 0.5% transfer as part of the papers for this meeting, just to see what the impacts would be on individual schools. I see it's a recommendation in the later agenda item that additional 0.5% is being recommended. We presumably are going to vote on it. It may or may not be the right thing to do, but I just wanted to know that I'd asked to see what the impact would be on individual schools. I might have missed it in the papers, so it may well be their apologies if I have missed it. But if it's not, they're interested why that's the case.
Bruce,
Chair,
you got
if I may, I can pick that one up. Apologies, Graham. The final finance paper, which was circulated last night, and it's hot off the press, we obviously did show the impact in terms of the 0.5% or the 1.143, equating to roughly £29 per pupil, and then obviously it would be £29 per pupil for per 0.5%, if you like. That I accept is an average across the whole of the county, and that will vary. We haven't received the APT tool we would use to do more detailed per school modelling, but we could certainly look at that ahead of the January meeting. And obviously, when we get onto that paper, mindful of discussions we had at the high needs meeting, we've asked for a permission for up to 0.5% twice for exactly that reason.
Thanks, Bruce. So I suppose I would just say that the minutes are not entirely accurate of the high needs meeting because it didn't reflect that request. And fair enough that we may get that in due course ahead of the January meeting. I think the consultation, it's difficult when the question was asked of respondents to the consultation if they don't fully understand the implications, and I think that it was a bit vague with regards to the implications, then I think it was hard for people to respond to that in an informed way. So I think it will be helpful to come back to that information in January. We can see where we get to when we discuss that particular point later this meeting. But I certainly would like to see more detail on the impact on individual schools.
Thank you.
Yeah, just to come in, obviously, yes, I've taken on what Graham said. Obviously, we have a high needs committee meeting before the next forum meeting in January, I believe. I've got my date, so we'll take that in hand, Graham. Thanks for pointing out.
Yeah, thanks. I should point out that the high needs committee minutes are just for information, and we need to obviously go through them as a true record. But it's helpful to have that information now, Graham, because we can then adjust it ahead of the next meeting.
Yep.
So thank you for that.
They should be marked draft. Certainly, my copy is. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Point taken. Thanks, Graham. I'll make a note of that. Just picking up your point, Graham Wilkins. We have the final paper, which is the schedule of dates for next meeting, has now set some high needs committee dates for next year. We've generally we're generally preceding schools forum meetings by 2 to 3 weeks. That's not possible for the January meeting because that would take us to the 1st of January. But we have got a meeting in February to look at that. At the end of the high needs meeting scheduled for February. Yeah.
It's all in my diary, Chair and Bruce.
Okay, thank you. Okay, so if we can pick up the F40, the Public Accounts Committee submission now, please, Bruce.
Yes. As members will be aware, we are members of the F40 Formula 40 organisation, which was formed going back some years, between I think the time the lowest funded per head 40 educational local authorities, in the UK and England. We do get a stream of what's potentially useful and interesting information through from F40 as part of our membership, and I thought we received in obviously mid-November details of the submission they had made to the Public Accounts Committee. So obviously we've shared that for the forum's information at this point. Happy to take any questions or any observations that members may have. Obviously, the key focus, as we know, is in terms of the disparity in terms of funding as represented by the graphs, and the how the way that essentially funding hasn't mirrored the rise in plan numbers over the last 5 years, or potentially going back further than that. There are some more general points made there in areas such as in terms of free school meals, in terms of the levels of funding compared to food inflation, staff inflation and such like. So again, I thought that was worth sharing for members' general information and interest. Obviously the final graph on a landscape basis obviously shows where Northumberland sits pro rata to all local authorities, which is fairly bang in the middle. But I think in terms of compared to the other Formula 40 authorities, where in relation to the high needs funding, which is represented in that graph, now we're the 5th highest funded per head local authority. However, to put some context around that, in terms of the number of students we have with plans in Northumberland compared to the rest of the country, we know it's that 6% as opposed to 5%, so it's 20% higher. So that clearly, only starts to sort of demonstrate where we're getting the severe financial challenges around the high needs block and high needs block funding at the moment.
I think the other point I would add, Bruce, is obviously at somewhere like Northumberland, proportionately the transport costs are going to be a lot higher as well, and in comparison to a lot of the more compact urbanised authorities, or smaller counties geographically, which doesn't help either.
And that provides major challenges both in transport costs and in both for students as well, who, because of some of the rural areas, will have to travel further to attend appropriate specialised support in some cases. And that's been one key focus around the development of the special support bases, educated appropriately closer to home, of course.
Okay, anyone have any further questions on item 5 or any comments? No. Okay, so if we move on to item 6, which is page 23 to 26 in your pack, and it's DSG monitoring.
Going to pass to my colleague from Corporate Finance, Principal Accountant Callum Stewart.
Street, yeah.
Callum Street. Sorry, Callum. Take this paper, Chair.
Thank you.
Do you want me to share on screen?
Yes, please.
Yeah, I think that would be helpful, Callum. Thank you.
Move you guys out of the way. Wrong one. There we go. So this is the picture that was shown to High Needs Committee 2 weeks ago. It does focus in on the high needs block, as we all know that is the exponentially growing area, and that is where a lot of the demand, frankly, and the high cost provision is met. At the moment, this does not include the adjustment that has just come out from the DFE, which actually adds in on import-export, adds in £87,000 back into the high needs block. So we have had a slight increase that sits outside of this paper. So just bear that in mind when we go through. So upon writing, so this is actually based on the end of September. The central schools block, as you can see, underspending slightly, which will pull back into the reserve. That is largely kind of due to admissions posts being vacant for part of the year, and historic commitments that are coming out this year that are underspending. The early years block is underspending by slightly more again, and that's just due to shifts in planned works and vacant posts through the team itself. The schools block is also underspending, again mostly due to vacant posts. High needs block. So this is obviously we've got 51.5 million in there plus another 87 that to be adjusted for, and the current overspend is 6.7, just shy of 6.7 million pound. The drawn reserve, so the overdrawn reserve of 1.847, that's what we ended the last year on, overdrawn by. So once you add the 6.69 onto that 1.847, we're left with a forecast kind of reserve pot overdraw in the high needs block of 8.537 billion. Now, whilst we report this separately here, everything that goes into section 251 and our returns goes in ultimately as a bottom line. So hence the position at the moment. Hopefully I'm not saying anything that anybody doesn't know, but just so we're aware that we are still in surplus currently, or rather at the end of last year, by 1.159, as you're required to add all the blocks together in reporting back. However, that does look like at the end of this year, and it still looks like we will be ending in deficit due to that growth in high needs block. I will go through all the factors that make up the high needs block deficit, just so that everybody's absolutely clear why we're in the position that we're in. So last thing to say is that draw looks like 5.193 on current projections million pound. Okay. Now, the high needs block is broken into the following service areas, which you can see in the table here. There are some reasoning below which we'll get to, but ultimately the position that was presented to Schools Forum in July predicted a forecast overspend on the high needs block of 6.546, and I'm currently presenting to you £144,000 worse position than that. However, bear in mind there's 87 gone back in, so we're not on a £51.5 million budget. The forecasting seems pretty accurate at the moment, but just so that everybody's aware, that was the position that was previously given, and it is slightly worse than that in this current forecasting position. So that table above does show all overspends and underspends. I've gone into detail for Schools Forum here to outline what makes that up. So within the AOTIS, it's really AOTIS, but the virtual school service, there's a £118,000 underspend, 97 of which is reclaiming ORPU and high needs funding from schools for children that have gone to virtual school. The other element is currently transport costs are slightly below budget, and we closely monitor that as it goes through the year. And on a budget that's sizable, £21,000 doesn't make a lot of leeway within there. The low incidence needs team, the central support budget, again, it's underspent. We've got a vacancy in the head of SEND position that will shortly be appointed to. which has generated an underspend. We've also had short-term vacancies within sensory support, and within the low incidence needs team itself, there is an underspend currently on training, a bit on travel, and budgeted agency costs. That's actually probably because in that area the vacancies, there aren't that many, so the team is full. So what we'd put in agency to cover what potentially will be vacancies, we've not had to spend. Within the high incidence needs team, we are also forecasting an underspend, 133,000. This in no part is due to the going back to the NHS, actually, for posts that they've previously said they would fund, and making sure that actually they do fund the pay awards that have, since that contract was signed, that we get that pay award, which has resulted in £41,000 coming back in to hint to fund those positions. Again, there has been short-term vacancies within the team through the year, and non-staffing associated again with bits of travel and training funds the rest of that underspend. Now, the main item really within the high needs block, £7.209 million overspend, all associated with growth in education, health and care plans. The forecast has increased. The number of EHCPs we've anticipated will grow to 4,200 by the end of the financial year, so that's by March. We're currently, correct me if I'm wrong, Bruce, around the 4,000 mark.
That's correct, Callum. Yeah, bang on.
We are slightly ahead, therefore, of the trend, which is that we've set out in terms of plans, but it would be far too simplistic to say a slight growth in plans ahead of what we thought is the complete driver here. It does matter, the composition of the plans and where the students are getting educated matters massively, because the cost, for example, within independent sector for the high needs block per pupil is higher than in mainstream and in our special schools. So whilst there has been growth, the composition has actually changed. The SSBs and the additional children going into those that would otherwise potentially be going into independent placements has mitigated some of the cost growth, but we're still seeing the drive-in plans, the drive-in complex needs. Associated then with the growth is pure top-up, so 1.247 million on top-up, and 195,000 on notional payments. In previous years, so all the growth from the previous years that we've seen, we were already predicting this to be 5.9 if that growth did not increase. So this is the growth on top of historic. You don't just see, you don't just have to worry about 1 year. It's every year going forward, depending on when that pupil get the plan. Inclusion service is underspent slightly. It's actually due to change in the procurement and the travel strategy within inclusion that's yielded underspend in there. Again, on the travel budget, we're talking all in all, including council and DSG elements that they pay for, we're talking over £27 million being spent on pupils transported to education establishments. So 82,000 can quickly change. It's not it's not entirely, it's not a massive underspend on that. I will flip back to the table just so that everybody's had a good view, or get it in view, of everything that I've just taken you through and how that makes it up, and invite anybody to ask any questions at this point on anything that I've gone through there. Shouldn't be surprising. It's a message that I've delivered, unfortunately, time and time again. Yeah.
Bruce?
You're on mute, Bruce.
Apologies. I was happy to pause to pick up any other points or questions people had, but just underlining what Callum's just said, just a few points. The £87,000 additional funding we received in terms of the high needs block from the DSA, that isn't simply an additional payment. That is a result of work undertaken by the Department by Education in relation to what they call the import-export exercise, where we forensically go through the data we're being charged for in terms of students receiving education in and out of county, and we've essentially recovered £87,000 as a result of that exercise. Obviously, the main challenge in terms of the finances is, as Callum sort of ably outlined, is in relation to the increase in top-ups. We are obviously, that money is going back out to schools, as Callum's outlined, but obviously schools would argue it's probably not going out in sufficient amounts to fully meet the needs of the SEN students there. But that's where the the greatest financial challenge is, if you like. And the final point I would make is Callum made the point in relation to the additional 195,000 overspend in relation to notional SEN payments. We introduced those payments with the best intentions, I think going back 3 years now, to support our most inclusive schools by providing additional payments for that first element 2 funding once schools went above a certain threshold. It was a great and still, the correct thing to do at the time, but given financial demands, that was one of the elements we agreed at July forum to moderate, in that we're making payments at the start of the year rather than the start of a term rather than the end of a term. And we haven't reduced that to hopefully reduce the level of overpayments in relation to notional. I can't gloss it any other way that actually does again mean reduced funding going to some of our schools. But I can't dress that up any other way given our financial challenges.
Anyone else like to say or ask anything before we move on? I just want to say thank you, Callum, for the clarity, which you show. Sorry, I've got a point here from Audrey. Audrey?
Thanks, Alan. I think we're in danger of about to say the same thing. I was going to say, actually, that's nice and clear, very straightforward. The messages aren't changing, so I think Callum's really clear about that. That's the thing that particularly Graham and High Needs Committee are really focused on, and we understand the challenges. Just wanted to remind everybody that this isn't unique to Northumberland. So this is a challenge throughout. We're all trying to work together collectively and see where we can use this money in the best way, as well as lobbying for additional funds where that's appropriate. We're still waiting to see what that might look like going forward around any SEN developments. But in the meanwhile, our public duty is to manage this the best way we can, provide schools with the support that is needed within funding envelopes, and already we're on it, 6.5 million or so overspent. So it will remain as a challenge for some while to come, but we'll continue to work together. And thank you to Callum and wider team for ensuring that everyone's clear about where our challenges lie. Thank you.
Thanks, Audrey. Yes, I think we might all be very frustrated about the situation, but I do thank Callum and the wider team for the clarity in which they've given us, so we can understand why we're in the position we are. And when you talk to other school leaders and other local authorities, we're certainly not alone in this, unfortunately, and it just represents the chronic underfunding of high needs over a long period of time, which we do hope the new government will address, but I'll wait to be convinced on that, unfortunately. Okay, thank you very much. If we can move on to item 7, which is obviously very intrinsically linked with this, which is page 27 to 40 in your packets, SEN update and dashboard. Bruce, are you going to start on this?
Yes, happy to, Chair. Thank you. Obviously, we shared some of this data to the preceding High Needs Committee a couple of weeks ago. The figures haven't changed fundamentally. The first few slides try to provide a little bit of context, both in terms of the increase in the rate of the new education, in the requests for new education, health and care plans, is demonstrated by the the number of requests slide on page 28, and the knock-on impact in terms of the number of active plans. Now, obviously, in terms of page 29 represents a position as at the end of 2023, the beginning of 2024, where there is national comparators now available. But we know that from that figure reported then of 3,310, we're now at 4,000 plans. So we know that there has been again a further acceleration in the rate and number of plans during 2024. I think I alluded to before in terms of in context of the Formula 40 figures, which showed Northumberland's funding per head in terms of high needs to be sort of fairly average. But what this slide on page 30 demonstrated, the actual number of plans we have in Northumberland, given some of our challenges, is essentially significantly above average. We've got 6% within Northumberland. 6% of our children and young people have education, health and care plans, compared to a regional average for the Northeast of 5% and a national average of 4.8%. The NCC position is essentially, we've got the 11th highest percentage out of the, all of the local authorities in the country. One of the sort of impacts of that, and again, sort of credit and testimony to a number of members of School Forum, people on this call today, we are maintaining far more people in mainstream education with educational health and care plans than has been the case previously. That's demonstrated again by those numbers as at the start of 2024, and again, I'm fully aware that figure will have increased significantly during the course of 2024. And again, but what we've also done is add additional capacity to our special schools, and those figures again have increased to 1,450, both through imploring that, and again, I know I'm working with our head teachers to use every potential element of capacity within the schools, every room, every nook and cranny, but obviously and I don't know if Barry's on the call on today's Schools Forum meeting, but obviously the opening of Gilbert Ward Academy has also been key in providing additional capacity in respect of that. I'm conscious slide page 33 in the pack is a very detailed slide, which essentially gives a breakdown of students with plans across various settings. I'm not going to go into that in any sort of great detail, but obviously what we see in terms of Northumberland, if we look at the 2024 column at the end, the number of students, which is the third last line, the number of students still in local authority maintained special schools is 30.6, which is still comparatively high number. And I think that's been one of the key factors which has meant that Northumberland hasn't fallen foul of entering into a high needs deficit previously, because we've maintained a significant amount of maintained special school provision. So tributes to the likes of obviously Andre, who's on the call today. obviously that's the national comparator data. We then get the latest figures in terms of, as Callum alluded to before, obviously since the high needs meeting a couple of weeks ago, we've since gone through the 4,000 figure. We've currently got 4,010, and in terms of a breakdown by age, I think, which is available on that top right-hand corner of the dashboard slide, I think probably the most significant element for Schools Forum is the increasing number of students who are getting education, health and care plans earlier. We see we've got 1,409 students with education, health and care plans between the ages of 5 and 10 respectively, which again, spelling that out, it means they're going to be in the system, and in receipt of additional resources and have additional needs for longer. Again, some internal sort of benchmarks around the time taken to complete healthcare plans and the sort of period when they're coming through, so we can profile them over a sort of time scale. But obviously we looked at these in more detail in high needs. I'm not going to dwell any longer on this point now, but happy to take any further questions on item 7.
Okay, no, thank you, Bruce. There don't seem to be any further questions. Again, thanks to colleagues for the preparation to put that pack together, and certainly I've used it with local governing bodies to try, some of the slides try and explain the situation, because I think everyone thinks it's just their school and nowhere else, but actually when you look at the bigger picture across the whole of the county, it's quite illuminating for those involved in governance to see those figures as well.
Chair Audrey's got a hand up.
Audrey.
Thank you, Chair Allen. That's a really good suggestion, actually. So we'll have a spring chairs of governors meeting. So there's 2 routes. I just wonder whether School Forum might want to suggest that either we or we share with chairs of governors direct and recommend that they go through that with their board so that they're clear, or perhaps we share that with head teachers and ask in each of both the partnership groups. I mean, we've got secondary heads on Friday this week, so we're sort of Graham James and I can certainly have that conversation with everyone on Friday and see whether everyone would find that helpful and useful. The more people that understand the broader, wider position and the reasons, and so it's no one feeling that it's an isolated viewpoint either with their school or particular to Northumberland, then the better really would be my view. But I'm happy to take committee members' thoughts.
James?
Yeah, I think same as Audrey, I think the more we share, the better it is. And I think in particular, head teachers know it. We know that it's like that out there, but it's certainly when we're dealing with external partners like governors, boards, to be able to say it's not just us, it's everyone here, it would be really useful. So I think it's a really good suggestion.
Thanks, James. Yeah, I would agree, and I think that given the position we're in, it would be impossible to over communicate this. So we need to make sure the message gets out as widely as possible, so people understand the full context of all of us, rather than just the individual schools, because it's a systemic problem. Got Audrey, and then I'll go to Nicola. Audrey.
Yeah, I'm perhaps here going to give Bruce and team a piece of work, because actually that's the Northumberland position, but it would be really helpful to be able to articulate some of this challenge nationally, so that we're also seeing that within context. So there are none of us sitting comfortable that we've got the overspend and high needs that we currently have. Let me tell you, we are one of the lowest. This is significant nationally. So whilst it's not a great position to be, it could be an awful lot worse, and many authorities would be very pleased to only have this level of overspend. So there might be some context that we might want to add, Bruce, and give a bit more information in there. We can do some work around that and share with some colleagues and take thoughts before we share it more widely.
I think that would be really helpful. Thanks, Audrey. So we've got Nicola next.
Yeah, I just have a question really just about sort of future proofing, noting the number of COSA refusals that has gone up significantly over 2024. But not as many tribunals happening in 2024, and it's just, what sort of mood music is there for those refusals going forward to tribunal that may end up in tribunal over next year, and how that's being future proofed.
David, I don't know if you want to answer that, and we'll come back to Graham.
Yeah, thanks, Alan. Sorry, Graham. The numbers for this year are something like 1,000 applications, COSA applications. So even after there is an increase in the turn down rate, but because of the increase in the number of applications overall, the actual number of plans this year at 800 will probably be the maximum ever. So we're still identifying need. We continue to stand by a reasonable and fair application of the two-part test. That's the statutory requirement. So sometimes, DFE come to visit us and want to interrogate these figures, just very similar to the figures you're looking at. Sometimes they'll come and challenge and say, your percentage of EHC plans seems to be a bit higher than the national average. Why is that, etc., etc.? And I always come back to them saying, we apply the two-part test. We stand by the law. That's what the entitlement is. Obviously, there are some shades of grey in and around that, but there hasn't necessarily been any active action to reduce the number of EHC plans or to make the COSA application process more difficult or anything like that, because legally we can't do that. And morally, we shouldn't be doing that anyway. If the learner's got needs, it should be recognised. So I'm quite comfortable with the growth in EHC plans, and I'm quite a fan of early identification and all those sorts of things. The problem is, as a result of that, here's the landscape we're sitting in, and how do we actually afford it going forwards? That's where the discussions, I think, rightly need to be. We do need to watch. I think our turn down rate is about at the national average. So I'm not sure if it's necessarily over harsh or under harsh. We're sticking to the two-part test. That's where it is. We've still got, probably will have 800 more this year through the whole academic year than we did at the start of it. And hence the other discussions that we need to have today.
Thank you, David.
Oh, sorry, there was another question about tribunals.
Yes.
Yeah, the tribunal rates haven't gone up as much as you would specifically think, but there's a very, very straightforward answer to that. It's because the waiting list for tribunals taking place has massively grown. So tribunals actually we're looking at not because of us, because of court support and the court element of the tribunal process. The tribunals are over a year away in terms of their dates. So there's more of them. Probably we need a slide which says the waiting list for tribunal as opposed to the number that have taken place.
Yeah, and unfortunately, I suspect that's only going to get worse as we have potentially parents with children with very high needs displaced from independent schools with the VAT rise. That's not going to help the situation at all, is it? Okay, Graham, if we come to your question now, please.
Yeah, just obviously to say what Audrey said very clearly. As you know, I serve as chair of school appeals across all the local authorities in the North East, and I've noticed over the last 2 years amount of educational care plans in all these authorities are going up and up. Like, for example, I was down in Hartlepool just before the summer, and one of their secondary schools had 50 plus children with educational care plan compared with 25 the year before. So just to show how much it's going up. Yeah, but just to say very clearly, as chair of high needs, I think Northumberland schools are doing an excellent job with the resources they're having. I'm grateful for making my job easier as chair of high needs. So yeah, thank you for that. But it would be grateful to know, how each authority is bearing, then we know exactly where Northumberland is. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thanks, Graham. Anyone else got anything like to add or ask? David, if your hand's still up from before, or
no, it was a new one just on the back of Graham's comment there. Absolutely. I mean, this is something we do need to keep reminding ourselves that the provision for special educational needs in Northumberland is a success story. There are more learners with higher levels of need having those needs met on a daily basis right now in the schools that all you guys represent. That it is an absolute success story. We're also running out of money, but that's hence the nature of this meeting and the discussions that follow to see how we can manage with that. But actually, from a provision and a delivery perspective, it's exceptionally tough for schools to do that with the limited resources that we've got. But actually, they are smashing it out the park in terms of numbers. Like I said, the degree of need, and also actually, even though tribunals and complaints sometimes feel like there's a lot of them around, there's also more happy parents, more happy residents out there with learners with high levels of need than ever before as well. It's a success story from that respect.
Thanks, David. James?
Yeah, I don't know whether there's a need. We've all kind of referenced it over the last 12 months about Northumberland being unique, and we all kind of referenced the fact that, you know, we're doing a great job and absolutely right, and the 2-point test has been applied. But I wonder whether there's maybe a deep dive needed into why we have so many HCPs in Northumberland. We all have anecdotal reasons. We talk about smaller settings, we talk about transport, but actually to go alongside kind of the facts and figures on a national level, almost more fact driven. Why is it in Northumberland we have so many? Because it's right and it's fair, and we've got to have HCPs to support our learners. But I think almost sometimes not us all relying on our anecdotal evidence, which is absolutely true and fair, but actually some hard facts behind it, almost a case study as to why Northumberland has so many.
Thanks, James. I think that's a really good point, because I think a lot of all of our effort is more or less going on dealing with the symptoms rather than the underlying causes. And actually, if all of us understood the underlying causes, which I think most of them have got a gut feeling about, the impact of austerity, etc. But it would be good to have some further information to benchmark that. So that's a really good point. Thanks, James. Bruce?
Thanks, Chair. Just a final point really was picking up Graham's point about his experiences across other local authorities and how Northumberland compared. Obviously, on page 30 of the pack, we showed the comparative percentages for Northumberland, being 6% compared to 4.8% of young people nationally. That, of course, is working on the previous end of the previous year's data of 3,310 education, health and care plans. Given that we're around 4,000 now, that will take that percentage north of 7%, I think, compared to that national figure. So, the point James has subsequently made as well about nail down why this is a specific issue for Northumberland is a really good one.
Thanks, Bruce. Graham Atkins?
Thanks, Alan. Yeah, just to come in on James's point, I wonder if that's something that Mike Finley's successor could perhaps do in the early period of their tenure, just as a new set of eyes coming in to look at it. David, we've got Nash on Friday. I imagine you'd be updating us where we're at with that appointment. But at Schools Forum, I think we'd be interested, given the significance of that role and perhaps the opportunity to just do a bit of a kind of stock take and then report back to Schools Forum as to what their perspectives are.
Yeah, I think that would be a really good exercise, Graham. And I think maybe there's perhaps an opportunity with the expansion of funding for nursery provision in early years. If we had more of an idea of why Northumberland is comparatively an outlier, maybe we could invest some of that resource in the right areas. Many schools are looking obviously at expanding nursery provision, doing more wraparound care. And I do wonder what parts that can play. And in particular, one of the things I've always thought is, when we get early contact with the parents, can schools go back to what the previous Labour government were trying to do and be a conduit for linking those families with other services and support, so that by the time they start in reception, maybe the children are in a better place than they would have been otherwise. So I think that would be really interesting to do some work around that. David?
Yeah, I'm more than happy to take some of that work forwards. Yes, a new head of SEND is on the way, and is actually going to be in Northumberland on the 5th and the 12th of this month for full-time placement from January the 1st.
Great, that's very welcome news. Thank you, David. Any further points or questions on item 7? Okay, if we can move on to item 8, which is the document you received yesterday, which is on the national funding formula and the school funding consultation. Bruce, are you going to lead on the ones?
Chair, can we share this on the screen, please? Because obviously I haven't got a printed copy in front of me. Please.
Happy to do that,
Yeah,
Graham. Yeah, no problem.
Yeah. Okay, no problem.
Hopefully you're seeing that now.
Yeah.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce.
Yeah, I mean, the report follows the format of previous years, despite the sort of writing this really with one hand tied behind our collective backs, because we don't have any provisional or indicative funding information available from the DFE yet. Generally speaking, we get initial policy documents and indicative figures circulated in July, which we're able to model and use in terms of future projections, which again are subsequently updated for the October census every year, October 2024 in this year, to influence the funding allocations from April 2025. But obviously, sort of due to pressures caused by the general election, the DFE have been unable to do that. We'll come back to the recommendations because that's something we need to work through in some detail and may cause some further discussion in relation to that. But it was worth, just in terms of setting the context first of all, the discussions around national funding formula aren't new to Schools Forum, and essentially where we're in a position where, despite some financial challenges to do so, we've set funding rates in line with national funding formula, certainly for the last couple of years. In relation to the information sort of shared by the DFE, essentially the only indication we've had was a policy note published in November earlier this month, which again I've shared the link in full within the report, within the second page of the report, if anybody wants to look at that or share that with colleagues in more detail. But I think the important headlines I've tried to pull through and highlight is the fact that we're talking about an increase of £2.3 billion to, their words, not mine, hence the speech marks, almost 63.9 billion nationally, an overall estimated 3.7% increase. However, if we know as part of that figure, high needs are receiving approximately a 9% increase on the basis of the information shared so far, we then get an indication of the potential level of increase across the schools block, equating to roughly 2.5%. Again, that's very crude mathematics on my part, taking the 1 million off the 2.3, and it's just sadly it might be a question of sort of management expectations a little bit around what the level of schools block increase is going to be. Clearly, that's a complicated position at the moment, and if you'll bear with me, I'm going to go through to the first appendix, which essentially shares what the ESFA are saying the provisional, and I stress provisional, national funding formula value elements are going to be for the following year. I'm not so focused on the end column in terms of the provisional values, but the process in terms of getting there, because what's happening for 25-26 are some of the specific grant funding elements we've seen in 2024-25 around and again I'll go at the bottom, the teachers pay additional grant, the teachers employers contributions grant, as well as the core schools budget grant are being rolled in, or baked in was the ESFA's spokesman's term, to the the basic allocations for 25-26. So again, the penultimate column highlights the increase that isn't accounted for, and that's a relatively small percentage on top of the original figures. That's my conjecture at that point, but that was less than 1% in case of the additional increases. The ESFA have said that some of the uplifts applied to the baselines from the grants do include increases baked in, but it's hard to extrapolate the impact of that at this point. Given we've set figures in line with the national funding formula figures in the previous couple of years, I did think it was worth sharing those figures with you. If we then go back to as an indication, again, minimum per pupil funding levels, again, looking more specifically at that, again, it shows how on the face of it, it appears to be a higher increase than it actually is in practice. Once you build in the effect of those grants that are being rolled in for 25-26, and that looks in more detail in relation to it there. We don't have individual Key Stage 3 and Key Stage 4 figures available yet, as will be in the case when we get the final settlement through. But I've taken those figures on an average in terms of secondary for the 25-26 projections. Again, sort of just trying to tweak out some of the key messages. The idea about a funding floor and minimum funding guarantee, that guarantees individual schools a level of certainty compared to their funding per pupil, and I stress per pupil, based on previous years. The rationale behind the minimum funding degree is if there is a significant change in the demographic of a school's population, that in theory, and this doesn't happen very often, obviously, you have a large number of students with higher levels of deprivation leaving, leaving a year 4, year 6, 1 year, and a lower sort of and a lower group coming in. That in theory could reduce the funding available to a school through elements such as the free school meals Forever 6, and the EDACI, the postcode based EDACI. So the funding per pupil could fall. What the MFG does is guarantee a level of funding per pupil, which in the last few years has been set at between 0% and 0.5% by the ESFA, and we've consulted on what level we should sit within those parameters, within those clear parameters. That's shifted slightly this year. That the levels aren't set at 0 and 0.5, but they're factoring a potential reduction of 0.5% per pupil up to 0. Now, in theory, that shouldn't happen very often. But again, it's a message, potentially a message from the SFA about managing expectations and a slight downturn in the the overall level of resources, which is again potentially concerning. But the proof of the pudding will be in the eating when we get our allocations in December. There is a similar message in relation to the Central School Services block. Northumberland, there's two elements to this, as Schools Forum will be aware. The element for ongoing responsibilities, such as school admissions, place planning, and the such like, which has actually seen slight falls over the previous years, and a historic commitments element in relation to committed capital costs and historic pension contributions, which again, the DFE have been reducing that year on year by 20%, anticipating that there will be a fall in those figures. That again is projected forward in terms of what that will mean for 25-26. More concerningly, because we're not seeing a fall in terms of the responsibilities around admissions, place planning, the such like. Given the funding window they're talking about a reduction per pupil of 2.5% or a maximum increase of 2.98, that's essentially, we're going to be getting somewhere between 1.45 and 1.53 million pounds in terms of those ongoing particular responsibilities, again, which doesn't help in terms of meeting pay awards. We're facing increased employers' charges as well. How realistic that is debatable, let's be honest. Again, historically, there hasn't been any earlier publication of information in the early years block. That's the only bit that has been consistent this year. And again, we're waiting for final allocations in relation to early years. More challenged than in most years, because of the expansion to the early years, the early years support being available, and how sort of providers can meet demand in respect of that. Needless to say, we'll get information out as early as possible in the new year once we receive it, in relation to potential funding rates paid to early years providers. We're not anticipating any significant changes to dedelegation this year. Historically, we've maintained both the same services in terms of dedelegation and maintained it at the same rates as well, to support schools, albeit in a small way, through their budgets. And again, we don't anticipate any changes to the way Council will seek funding from maintained schools in relation to dedelegated members. Okay, in relation to, again, section 10 of the report and the disapplication requests, it is an explicit ESFA requirement that we bring our disapplication requests to Schools Forum for Schools Forum report support in respect of those. Some of them are relatively formulaic and hopefully straightforward, but we'll take you through all of those now. First of all, there's two elements in relation to school partnership reorganisation that's ongoing at the moment. As we reported to Schools Forum last year, where obviously we've been going through a reorganisation in relation to the Cogat partnership area up in Hamble, which essentially the key element there sees James Calvert Spence College change its intake rather than from year 5, which has historically been the case, to a more traditional secondary model, taking pupils from year 7. As the first phase of that last year, we sought Schools Forum support to retain year 5 funding for the period from September through to March within the first schools, and that has worked successfully, because that does involve a transfer in resources from the predecessor, from the James Calvert School, to the first schools, the feeder schools in respect of that. That was supported by Schools Forum last year, and again, we're seeking the agreement of Schools Forum that again, so we can complete that with phase 2 when the year 5 students who are currently within the newly formed primary schools stay on to year 6. Again, because of the way school funding works in terms of the traditional lagged model, in terms of the October census informing the subsequent financial year's allocations, because those pupils aren't in the year 6 pupils aren't yet in the primary schools, we need to make a funding adjustment in respect of that to ensure that they're adequately funded from September 2025. I'll pause for any questions or queries in relation to that. Hopefully that's all relatively straightforward. Okay. Similarly, obviously the second reorganisation exercise that's going on at the moment is in relation to the Berwick partnership area. That would be the first phase from September 2025, where students who would have historically moved in year 5 to a middle school will be retained by the schools that are transitioning from first to primary. And essentially we're seeking the support of the Schools Forum as to reallocate funds as part of that exercise as well. The report on page 4 highlights in terms of the sort of potential transfer of resources for James Calvert last year was £232,000, and we'd anticipate a broadly similar figure this year. Proratering that in terms of the adjustment across the 3 Berwick middle schools into the feeder primaries, anticipate that the figure will be something in the region of £440,000. But the truth of the matter is, without that transfer of funds, we can't realistically expect the primary schools to support those new year 5 students, or year 6 in the case of James Calvert, in their new setting. Is there any questions or any sort of anything it would help to clarify in relation to that? Because obviously we will specifically be seeking Schools Forum's support in relation to that particular disapplication request. If not, I'm happy to move on. Again, in terms of the 11.2 exceptional premises factor, there's been a long-standing arrangement by which 2 of our smaller first schools, Seaton Delaval and Beaufront, is listed in the report. The 2 schools concerned have long-standing, as part of the school promises, long-standing rental agreements. Now, the indication provided, the guidance provided by the DFE is if there is an exceptional, if it accounts for more than 1% of their DSG, it can be, we can seek to treat it as an exceptional factor, and it would be reflected, we'd receive additional premises funding subsequently for that. We've done that on a long-standing basis for Seaton Delaval First School and Beaufront, who essentially receive an exceptional factor for £9,000 for Seaton Delaval and £6,700 for Beaufront, respectively. I know in the context of the the overall DSG settlement, it doesn't sound a great deal of money, but it is to the schools involved because of their respective size. There is a third element to that now in terms of introduced by obviously the redevelopment work at Astley. And again, it's been necessary as part of that work to enter into a rental agreement with obviously a third party. That was one of the questions the DFE had. I need to stress that it's obviously, this isn't the council funding itself. It is third party landlords in all three cases, where again, the figure is over the 1% threshold compared to even a larger school like Astley's DSG. So again, we've made a disapplication request to the ESFA by the deadline of the 18th of November. There is further work involved in that, but again, the ESFA would seek the support of Schools Forum in relation to that disapplication request. Are there any other queries in relation to those exceptional rent factor ones? The one point I should make, the reason it's important to make the exceptional factor request is obviously it's subsequently fed into the premises funding formula factor. So it does generate additional income across the county. We can then transfer it to the individual schools concerned. That's why it's important for Forum to support these two specific applications. Okay, moving on. Obviously, the third element of the disapplication request is in relation to the block transfer. As outlined in terms of the report circulated, and hopefully Forum members will be aware that historically the amount of transfer from the schools block to the high needs block that has been sought has varied between 1%. Going back to 2018 to 2019, it has dropped as low as 0.25%. Going back a couple of years, essentially, Northumberland has always historically varied its transfer request, as dictated by the prevailing position of the time, both in terms of plan numbers, resources required in relation to those, and the overall sort of surplus or deficit position. As outlined in the report, any transfer request over 0.5% does require, as well as the support of Schools Forum, the support of the Secretary of State, who reviews individually any such requests. So again, that's the reason that we've structured the two-part sort of decision to Schools Forum on the basis we have. Any additional request again will result in will require the submission of a DSG management plan to the ESFA. We shared a draft of the DSG management plan at the High Needs Committee. We are in ongoing discussions with the ESFA in relation to the management plan, and also with other authorities who've previously been through this process to ensure that our plan is very accurate and as helpful as possible. But again, that involves the submission of parallel unmitigated and mitigated figures showing that what actions Northumberland are taking to manage the overall plan. And again, because we're relatively new, as demonstrated by Callum's figures earlier we're relatively new to the DFE's radar in respect of this. It's an exercise we're just going through now, compared to again some other authorities who've been part of Safety Valve and delivering better value groups dictated by the SFA for the past couple of years. Again, some of the proposals we're using to manage and mitigate the demands on the high needs blocks were the subject of discussion at the 3 workshops held earlier on this year at both QE High School, ANIC, and also NCA, and thanks to the schools for hosting those. Ideas have emerged from those in terms of alternative provision models, see an expansion of specialist support bases to support students closer to home, and we've, as well as some of the more sort of accountancy based issues that I've outlined previously around the adjustments to the notional payments and delaying any requests for top of banding reviews to the start of the following term. And again, we've implemented those as was agreed, those 2 specific issues around notional and timing of bandings at the July Schools Forum. But demonstrated by the meeting today, we know the demands that are being placed upon the high needs block in terms of through essentially the payment of additional top-up fundings. So that's why we're seeking the two-phase recommendation that's detailed below. I'll pause for any comments or sort of any other points anybody wants to make at this point. I think we'll take
Sorry,
the sorry, Graham.
I was a late hand that went up there. This might just be in relation to what the last bit you just talked about, but if you can go back to the MFG and just kind of explore that, we understand the principle of making sure that there's no kind of reduction in per pupil funding and there's that kind of minimum basis. But am I right in thinking that some gain more than others? And previously we've had those schools who otherwise would, without the MFG, they would face a decline. The MFG lifts them, but other schools can be lifted by a greater percentage depending on their circumstances. Is that the case? And is that the case going into the year ahead?
Once we get our APT model through, we'll know that better. That is potentially the case. Again, I'm not going to start pull historic papers from this time last year now. What we do know is that some schools will benefit more from the overall settlement than others. That may be dictated by a combination of factors. At one level, in terms of the introduction of the minimum per pupil funding, going back a couple of years, did support some specific schools in relation to that. In relation to the MFG, provides essentially the support to, as I outlined before, schools with a changing in terms of population, but with a change in their pupil characteristics as opposed to a change in their overall pupil numbers. Again, there's no elements within the national funding formula, or even historically the Northumberland one, that would protect schools from falling school numbers, and that remains the key sort of focus in relation to that. What will happen, and one of in terms of increases in free school meal numbers and the such like, will mean that some schools may get a higher level of increase than others. But the opposite of that, if, as we've done in the past, apply capping and scaling, capping will then reduce the per pupil level of increase that schools would get who would otherwise sort of benefit from a high level of influx of free school meal students or something like that. So it's a complex picture. The short answer is yes, but it depends. The specific elements of the funding formula will have an influence at different times. When we introduced the cap last year, and in order to sort of make the 0.5% transfer, that meant essentially capping and scaling back a number of the per pupil increases that schools who'd had an increase in their relative deprivation indices would have otherwise received, in order to fund the overall 0.5% transfer to the schools block.
Yeah, thanks, Bruce. That's helpful. And I do remember that discussion last year, and that was really helpful. Actually, it was kind of informed, where we kind of weighed up the pros and cons and came to a conclusion. That it just seemed to me, just on MFG, it's not clear what's actually, if anything, indeed, has been recommended at this stage, and I don't think capping was mentioned. So, are these things that we're going to come back to in terms of actual recommendations?
Two things in relation to that. We're essentially that they're part of the current school consultation.
Yeah.
I think in relation to the point is well made in relation to whether or not we should be, and we'll maybe pick that up as part of the school consultation and pick that and take a sounding from schools forum at that point. I admit, because we're currently due to consultation, and because of the new information arising about the negative MFG, we haven't formally consulted at that point. But that's a fair question. If we look at the school consultation results as they are so far, Graham, and then we can maybe come back to that point.
Yeah, fine. I suppose I just think I don't want us to commit to something at this stage that we haven't really had a thorough discussion around, because I do recall in broad terms, the discussion last year, which was really, I think well considered, and enabled us to arrive at an informed position. So as long as we're not going to commit ourselves to a position at this stage on a kind of ill-informed basis, and we can revisit that in the new year, then that's fine.
2 points in relation to that. One, the consultation does give some indicative figures in relation to certainly MFG and the impact of that, and that's relatively small within the overall settlement. It's again, it's in the region of about £140,000, as I recall. And I think one of the key things in relation to the recommendation I must emphasise is, when we're seeking delegated powers, both, for Audrey and our lead member to look at the overall position in relation to that, as is done in the past, we're seeking agreement for up to. Now, as was the case for, if I get my years right, it wasn't 20. We're currently at 24-25. It wasn't 23-24, but 22-23. We sought, we gained agreement for up to 0.5%. But when we received the final settlement through, I think we reduced our request, through using delegated powers, to 0.25%. And that, again, in the cabinet report will be, requesting the same thing, because we're in the same position that we're simply writing that report before we get the figures through.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
If in terms, ironically, what we're, in terms of the next section of the report looks at the schools consultation. As at yesterday, and again, I apologise for the late circulation of the report. I was trying to make it as current as possible. We'd received 17 responses through, and I think it's maybe worth just going to see what the we'll spend some time looking at those responses. We'll go that now. Those positions are detailed in the second appendix of the report. Sort of in terms of the first key question, if there's nothing duplicitous there, anybody that's completed the survey will know that questions 1, 2, 3 are probably what's your name, and which school are you in, and all that. So the first key question in terms of the consultation was, do you support a transfer of 0.5% from the schools block to the high needs block for the financial year 25-26, in line with the 24-25 figure? 17 responses to date, and of those, 13 are clearly in favour. So there is a clear majority there. I don't think I'm misrepresenting the figures in respect of that. And again, if we then go on to ask about the additional 0.5%, where essentially figures become, and again, of those who expressed a preference, and I'm not referring to cat food in this instance, there is a far narrower majority who those in respect of that 0.5% transfer, but clearly, there isn't as clear a majority in relation to that. And then when we asked the question, as we did last year, about future years increases and increasing, that's where there is that flip. And I fully understand the reasons in terms of for that. And, because of the lack of certainty about it and the sort of potentially greater demands. So again, there is a clear majority in relation to the 0.5% transfer, less, less so for in terms of subsequent increases. Again, we'd ask the question, it would be rude not to just ask, taking into consideration any other suggestions or comments people had.
Bruce, can I just stop you because James has got a question?
Apologies, James. Yes.
No problem at all, Bruce. I just wondered, Bruce, whether obviously filling this in, being up to date, attending schools forum, it was relatively straightforward. But thinking about other people that have no concept, I think kind of question 4 and 5 are okay, but then when you start delving into it, you're probably going to get more people answering don't know because they don't know. In terms of how do you reduce which funding formula element to reduce. I guess that's just for them, which one affects them the most. So I think it's almost perhaps, and I think Graham touched on this at the very start of the meeting, knowing the impact of increasing the 0.5% in the schools block, it would mean this or X for general schools per student might have yielded a better result, because I think kind of 6 and 7, it's such low numbers in terms of a useful consultation that it might almost mar our thinking a little bit.
Okay. I mean, again, in terms of the top of page 5 of the latest report, that's, the figure I quoted earlier to to Graham about it being just over £29 per student in respect of that £500,000 transfer. But you know,
I
I
think Audrey would like to respond.
Okay.
Thanks, Chair. I was just going to ask Bruce whether or not we had shared, or whether we have the latest send place planning, so knowing what our future numbers look like, because I think actually it's not just about what does the impact mean to schools. I think going alongside that, everybody needs the future projections, because it won't surprise you, they're only going one way. So we must remember that this is about ensuring, for me, that resources go to the areas that need them, the schools that need them, particularly where we've got more inclusive schools taking more students with EHCP. So that information for me sits hand in glove. And if we haven't shared that, Bruce, then I think we should. It may be that we've shared it separately, if that makes sense. So we might have done the finance information and we might have shared the detailed information in two different conversations. I think it needs to be in one conversation.
We've
Thanks,
shared,
Audrey.
yeah, we've shared the current version of the send capacity and place planning strategy. It's probably going back just under 2 years now. I know there's a current draft just being finalised, and it was always the intention to bring that to Schools Forum, but obviously that probably won't be available till it's been through Cabinet into the new year. But yes, that would certainly be coming to Schools Forum at that point.
Thanks. That would be helpful, Bruce, because I think everybody needs to see the whole picture. I think that's what Graham and James are suggesting, the whole picture. And that's not a criticism, just about putting everything together so the information's there. Thank you.
Graham?
Yeah, just thanks for that, and thanks for that, Audrey. I think we absolutely are seeing it as the whole picture, and I think that the concern that I feel within Schools Forum, not in no way a criticism, but just there's a kind of risk of this, that we're very focused on the deficit of the high needs block, and we're looking for a solution to that. But if we put our other hats on and look at the impact on individual schools, if there's more money going out of schools when we're so struggling to meet needs, then there's a real risk of counter productivity that we struggle even more and put greater pressure on the system. So the balance absolutely has to be struck, because again, just looking at it from a kind of parochial perspective, in our circumstance, we've invested a lot in recent years on additional support to meet a need that's not putting pressure on the system, but that money is going to run out fairly soon. We'll see what comes through with the what the settlement looks like for us as individual schools, but we're really concerned, having used our reserves over the last 2 or 3 years post-COVID to meet this post-COVID, post-austerity issue that's affecting young people and then affecting schools. If more money is coming out of us as an individual school, we can do less, and then that puts more pressure on the wider system. So that balance is absolutely essential, and the reason that people like myself and James are making the interjections that we are is just to make sure that balance is not too skewed in favour of addressing the high needs deficit as a Schools Forum kind of local authority issue, because the knock-on effect of doing that by taking more money out of individual schools is potentially counterproductive.
Okay, thanks, Graham. Audrey, your hand up.
Yeah, I agree, Graham, but I would say it's not a local authority issue, it's our issue collectively. So I am really clear that what we are trying to do is make sure schools get the resources they need. And in doing that, David and I both have a duty and a responsibility around ensuring we're managing the public monies as best we possibly can. The last thing that I think we want is any ESFA intervention, because that will be not good in terms of, safety valve program, because speaking to any authorities or anyone who's been through that, is there are very draconian decisions taken that don't allow us to do some of the things that we do really, really well at the moment. And so that potentially could become a really even more challenging position. So understanding and recognizing all that, but being conscious of potentially what could happen. So it's a good balancing act that we're all trying to manage here. But I think getting all that information at the same time, making sure that everybody's informed to make the decision right, is the key for me. So thanks for that.
Thanks, Audrey. David?
Hi, good discussion and absolutely expected. Got a couple of points that I'd sort of planned to make before the meeting. I wasn't quite sure where in the meeting would be the appropriate time to do it, but I think this is probably it. Absolutely right to want to look at where the money's coming from. So, you know, from which schools, how much is that? What's the average per pupil that this would be the ongoing effect of that? But I think it's also worth having a consideration about where this 0.5% historically has gone, and therefore where it's likely to go, and then this ask for or this consideration of another 0.5% and where that is going to go. So the overriding area, which has shown by far the biggest area of growth, is top up. And I would suggest that all of the requests to date over years to Schools Forum about cutting the cake and using some of Schools Block into high needs block, all of that money that's been requested and therefore gathered as income into the high needs block has all gone out to schools. It's not funded other projects or what have you, or centrally organised bits and pieces. The 0.5%, it's basically been underpinning top-up payments. We've gone beyond that point now, but actually, interestingly enough, the requirements that we would need to set out to the Secretary of State, if Schools Forum allowed or suggested going forwards with another 0.5% transfer, the discussion then would go to the Secretary of State, and within that we need to prove what additionality that's bringing to the system. So actually, if we do go to the Secretary of State and say we're really overspent on top-ups, we just want to take the money from the whole school group and direct it in more top-ups to schools that have got more SEND learners, I think it'll be kicked back, because they'll say, well, you're just perpetuating where you are, and actually it doesn't make much difference. You're going to have to go away and do something more substantial than that. Having said that, possibly in the thought processes of what might the 0.5% bring us that's in addition, then my current viewpoint would be that it would be dedicated to the support of specialist support bases or additional school-based specialist provisions. There's a lot of that underway, thinking and communications, and that has already been in the primary sector, which has been funded by the funding that those learners would bring to their mainstream school anyway, and combining that together. In the secondary sector, there's a lot of conversations with separate schools about expanding their provision to meet the needs of local residents. And actually, I think in that position, we are looking at stuff where the amount of funding that's currently coming in isn't going to stretch to being able to deliver the specialist provision that's required. And therefore, maybe there is some position point here where whatever the decision on the first 0.5% is, maybe that it does continue to be the top-up for top-ups. But actually, the second 0.5%, we will have to come up with a strategy of where that's going to be spent. And I'm just putting forward that I will be happy to say maybe that could be the budget lined in the high needs block, which Callum and the team could report on to Schools Forum and other interested parties, saying how have we used that transfer to support additionality of resource, which in the longer term creates more inclusive provision closer to home, and therefore is legitimately an invest to save manoeuvre. At the moment, we're struggling to find the money to invest to save because we're looking at a big deficit. And therefore, the obvious thing is to cut. But we also know that cutting services could increase the actual overall costs. So we're right on the horns of the dilemma. But whether this 0.5% would be more palatable if it was ring-fenced for additionality to the system, which is our investor save pot.
Thank you, David. Before I go on to Graham, I think it's important just to remind everyone that our role is an advisory role. So we're representing the sector across Northumberland. And as David rightly says, the decision-making layers are above us. So to 0.5% is within the gift of the local authority. But when we go over 0.5, that has to go to the Secretary of State. And we have to have a clear case for that. I think it's just useful to remind everyone we're not actually making the decision. We are just purely advising. Graham?
Yes, thank you, Chair. I agree quite clearly with Audrey. We do not want to be taken over by anybody, right? Like one of our local authorities, not far away from us. And also very clearly what Graham said, Graham Atkin. I mean, my school, we're hitting the reserve quite hard now, and obviously going to be running out of money very, very quickly. So yeah, but obviously this money, I'm always concerned as Chair of High Needs that every year we have to go back to school for them and ask for some more money to actually there. But it's very clearly that money is being used very well in the needs of our children. And that's what the most important thing. The needs of our children must be met. So we need to do it. But yes, I don't want to keep after going year after year to go back, but somewhere along the line, we'll have to, it'll have to level out somewhere, I don't know if it's COVID that caused the problem or not, but in my school, we only had 2 children with educational care plan. We're now up to 6 with another 3 on the thing. So that's a primary school. It just makes you wonder, all the other schools in Northumberland must be the same. So it would be very useful. So what I think James said very clearly about having, the breakdowns and things like that would be very useful to know exactly where all this money is going to. So thank you, Chair.
Thanks, Graham. Bruce, is there anything else you'd like to say in relation to the paper before we move on to voting?
I think, again, we just go back. I'll just share some of the comments received. Just picking up Graham's point there, I think, as David's outlined previously, I think we've been clear about where the money historically has gone, and that's been recycled back to schools. I think James's question about why we've seen this sort of great increase of the in terms of the education and health plans is a far more difficult one to answer, but we'd probably get far more insight from that. Just in terms of, we asked as part of the questionnaire and part of the current consultation, which again is still out there, for any comments or suggestions people had in terms of for addressing the high needs deficit. I've just highlighted some key ones here, which I'll sort of share with you, highlighting about what, in terms of variability about mainstream schools are offering as reasonable adjustments. I think we've talked about, standardizing the ordinarily available provision, and that remains a challenge for us. Fewer out-of-county provisions, more on-site fully funded provisions in schools. And I think that's things we're all fully supportive of and are doing at the moment, in terms of more effective specialist services as well. And again, working with mainstream schools to improve provision in order to decrease demand on special schools, again, comes through. And particularly supporting mainstream schools to increase parental understanding. And again, that's something we've been doing in terms of working with parents and sort of choice advisors to help inform that. And that's obviously something that's been coming through in terms of the initial questionnaire responses. Again, moving on to the wider schools funding issues. I take James's point entirely about the question about which bit of the funding formula factor should we cut if we need to balance. That was probably a late addition, given potential pressures around the funding and question responses we saw elsewhere across other Northeast authorities. We could take the approach of cutting a specific individual element, or what has historically been the case in terms of Newcastle, they've shaved all of their funding formula elements because they haven't yet reached national funding formula by a sort of a given percentage, so they may be paying 99.9% of it. And that's obviously something we can look at and have dealt with historically under the delegated powers when we get the final figure through to balance their budget. And it's probably worth making that point in relation to the capping and scaling as well. There is to date support in relation to the use of capping and scaling. It's something we've outlined previously. The MFG question was in there as well. And historically in Northumberland, we've tried to support schools to the maximum extent of the MFG, which costs a relatively small element of the overall DSG settlement. Clearly, rather than setting at 0.5%, that would be sitting at that sort of 0% freeze at this point. But I'd advocate, as I said in the report, that's something we'd be looking to do in principle as part of the overall allocations for 25-26.
Thanks, Bruce. I think David would like to come in at this point.
Yep.
Yeah, just to comment on some of the questions that we didn't ask in this particular consultation. There's been a lot of discussion over a good period of time now, 2+ years, a number of workshops with a number of different interested parties, mainly schools, and both, I think, at this forum and also at the subcommittee for the high needs block, I've brought forward a number of presentations going through a list of unpalatable options, I suppose, and you know, of those, including what Newcastle are doing, for example, which is just a 5% cut in all top-up values. You know, there is a methodology on paper to solve the high needs block gap, which is to cut top-ups by 1/3. So we've been out, discussed those options, discussed them with yourselves, I've market tested them with Senco's, talked about the Senco conference, that sort of thing. So some of the suggestions that were made, the feedback for them was that they would actually go on to cost more in the overall, and therefore there hasn't been an ask or a pressure to ask within this consultation, would you consider a cut in top-up values as an example? And I'm labouring the point on one thing, but we're not doing that because it doesn't look like it will be productive, and that might actually cost more. We haven't progressed with questions about maybe considering school balances before we look at top-up increases. We've not brought that forward. It's very complex, but also a number of schools believe that was going to be quite unfair. Some schools might be in support of it and so on and so forth, but it's such a contentious issue, again, which could lead to increases in exclusions and all that sort of thing, have a negative knock-on effect. And also some of the options around trying to restrict growth in EHC plans, which goes back to my point from earlier, which will be illegal because, you know, we've got the 2-part test, and doing something in addition to that in order to try and control the EHCP growth again, and then also comments about negative impacts from that, which might lead to further cost or needs not being met and escalation for families and so on. So there's an awful lot of questions we didn't ask because we didn't think that they would, you know, we've been told by yourselves that they're not going to have a positive outcome at this point in time. So what we're really left with is the consultation we've got here, and the questions within that, which are centering around what you're about to do in a minute, which is give a recommendation or not to the 0.5% and then to the other 0.5%. Having explored a lot of other options along the way, which are much more unpalatable than what's being suggested here. Does this solve the problem and eradicate the high needs block issue? No, but at least it puts it's trying to fit a balance point to step in the right direction. But obviously it's for yourselves to give your views and your considerations accordingly.
Thanks, David. Any further comments or questions on this, Bruce?
No further comments from me. Happy to take any other questions as you know, as appropriate. If there are no other questions, I propose that we return to the recommendations, which I again will share on screen. Again, obviously, as I think Alan ably outlined before, this, you know, as part of the democratic process, we will subsequently take a report to Cabinet, and the Cabinet report will again ultimately seek delegated powers to deal with this when we get our settlement figures through, as outlined has been the case previously. So, in relation to the recommendations, can I ask Schools Forum members, please, in terms of recommendation A, do we have support for the disapplication requests arising from the second phase of the Coconut Partnership reorganisation from September 2025?
Can I just ask, Bruce, can't see even on a full screen mode. I can't see everyone's screen. Would it be easiest just to do, if yourself or Luke can note a show of physical hands for each of these, just so we've got a record of it?
That's probably the best way to do it, physical or virtual. Yeah, both. And then we if there are any objections to them, we'll obviously pick those up as well.
Yes.
So all those in favour of the this application request in respect of the COGAT partnership. Yeah.
And just remind people
Barbara,
for using virtual
Barbara.
hands to lower them.
Yeah. Are there any objections to the COGAT partnership disapplication request? Anybody not in support of that? Okay, I think that's clear. Moving on, the Seeking School Forum support to the disapplication request in respect of the first phase of the Berwick partnership reorganisation for September 2025. Can I ask all those in favour?
Excuse me, sorry, Chair, could I just ask that people actually use their virtual hands, because we can't see everybody on the screen, and it would probably be easier to do that.
Yes, I think so. I've tried to see everyone, but yeah, I think virtual hands is probably the way forward for this.
Okay. I think
that's a majority of those present.
Barbara and Ben, can I just check in terms of your position? Are you able to indicate support or otherwise? Or... Thank you, Ben. Barbara gone. I think. Barbara, can you just give me a thumb? Yeah, thank you. Right. I think again we have full support for the Berwick partnership disapplication request. Is there anybody who would like to indicate an objection or even an abstention to that from Schools Forum members? Oh, that seems to be able to drop their hands on that basis. Okay. If we move on, the support for the disapplication request in respect of the additional premises factors for the exceptional rent costs borne by Beaufort, Seaton, Delville and Astley. All those in favour? I think we've got a clear majority there again. Just in terms, I'm conscious of a little bit of a lag. Thank you, Ben. Barbara, again, are you in favour of that? Just give me a nod or a thumbs up. Thank you. Thank you. Is there anybody wishing to express any concerns or objections in relation to that specific item C? Okay. Item D. And again, agreed to a transfer of up to 0.5%, approximately 1.143 million from the schools block to the high needs block for 25-26. All those who are in support of that recommendation? Thank you, Barbara. Ben. Thanks, everybody. I believe that's full support of Schools Forum members to the 0.5% transfer. In case I've omitted or overlooked anyone, are there any specific objections to that request? Doesn't appear to be any. Thank you. Okay. The agreement to a further transfer of up to a further 0.5%, therefore up to 1% in total, from the schools block to the high needs block for 2025-26.
Before we vote on this, Bruce, can I just ask, is it imperative we make a decision now, or given the request that Graham made about the further information on funding and the full results of the consultation, in terms of the timeline, can we actually delay this to the next meeting in January, which isn't actually too far away, or do we have to make a recommendation now?
I think, I suppose the overriding recommendation is the one in relation to delegated powers, Chair, which essentially, seeks delegated powers through both the chair and lead member for children's services, which essentially, sets the final formula values. I think if we were to if at this point we were to defer that item, the issue we have at that point is that would literally give us the return for the DFE essentially needs to go in by the 22nd of January, which gives us very little time in terms of for planning and modelling at that point. I'm happy to, again, happy to share figures and bring figures to the January meeting, but I'm just wondering about the practicalities. Though I appreciate, it's challenging without the figures there for all concerned.
Well, it's been made more of a challenge by external factors with a change of government and obviously the delay in getting the funding figures to schools, which is obviously beyond our control.
Yes, that's largely what I was referring to. It would be exceptional if we deferred a decision to January in respect of that. I think I would. My initial impression, and again, I'm other members on the call, it would be to sort of take an initial vote, and if that's not conclusive, it to be recorded as such, and then again dealt with under the delegated powers subsequently, which obviously we will bring further information back to January in relation to that. So I think it's worth taking a vote now.
Okay, I agree, Bruce. I think it's worth getting, taking the temperature from Schools Forum at this stage, even though members have asked for more information. But I understand the timelines imposed externally on us, and we'll have to adhere to that.
Yeah, appreciate that. Okay, so again, I'll ask the question in relation to recommendation 2E. Schools Forum's views on the agreement to a further transfer of 0.5%, therefore up to 1% in total from the schools block to the high needs block for 2025-26. Okay. So there are 6 members in favour of that, 7 members in, 7 members in favour of that, and I think Leslie, can I just check we've got the details there before I change a question?
Yeah, I got 7 people there as well.
Yeah, okay, thank you. Can I ask those who I don't know if it's an abstention. Are there any abstentions in relation to that, or any? And then I'll take objections subsequently. Are there any abstentions?
I think I'm an abstention only on the basis that I don't feel sufficiently informed to make a fully informed decision. So that's why I'm not in favour of it. I'm not necessarily going to oppose it, and in fact I might be in favour of it, but I feel I need more information to make an appropriate call.
And I'm sure we'll minute that appropriately.
Yeah, I think that's noted, Graham. Absolutely.
Yeah, okay. Bruce, it's the same for me here. I'm not against it at all. I just don't feel I can vote for it without knowing the full picture.
Thank you, James. Yeah.
Me as well. Yeah.
Ben, thank you. Barbara, I'm just checking in terms of what your particular position in the. Are you in support or looking to abstain? You're in support. Thank you, Barbara. Thank you. Okay. Right. I don't think we can achieve any more in relation to that this morning, and thanks to everybody for the participation. I know it's a challenging issue. Again, so in relation to the support of the associated disapplication request to the in relation block transfer, I'm not going to take another vote on that, but we presume the way you voted in relation to the first 2 requests reflects your feelings in relation to that block transfer request, and ensure that's minuted accordingly. Agree that the funding values for 25-26 will be set in line with the principles outlined in the report. Essentially, we're trying to match funding formula values as we have previously. bearing in mind what we've talked about this morning in relation to MFG, capping and scaling, formula values and the such like. And then finally, I think it's important to highlight H in terms of noting the delegation of final decisions on the values to the Executive Director of Children's Services in consultation with the lead member once the figures become known in December. So there will be a cabinet report submitted to the meeting on the 14th of January, and then obviously we have a schools forum meeting scheduled on the 15th of January, and we will clearly bring a further report to the schools forum meeting on the 15th. Okay. Is there any other comments or observations in relation to item 8?
No.
Okay, thanks everyone.
Thanks, Bruce.
In terms of back to the agenda, obviously we have now attached a schedule of meeting dates for 2025. I apologise that the first 2 dates have been marked as provisional. I think hopefully they should be in people's diaries by now. And again, the third meeting being the face-to-face one in County Hall in July. What we've added to the bottom of that is proposed dates for the High Needs Committee in order for people to put them in the diary. And again, I think we'd follow the previously successful formula inviting all schools forum members and representatives to the High Needs Committee. So there are 3 dates there in relation to that. Okay.
Bruce, just before you go ahead, you got Wednesday the 3rd of February. According to my diary, the 3rd of February is a Monday. Do you mean the 5th of February for the High Need?
I do mean the 5th. I've incorrectly taken 2 weeks off the 19th and made it the 3rd, which must be a concern to everybody, given I'm going to be balancing the figures over the next few weeks. Yes.
Okay, cheers. Thank you, Bruce.
Yes, sorry, that should read the 5th. Thank you, Graham.
Thanks, Bruce. I haven't had any items submitted for any other business at this stage, so that just leaves us with the next meeting, which is on the 15th of January 2025. So I would just like to say thank you to everyone for your participation, and that having been on a schools forum and another local authority, I would just like to say that first of all, the quality of information that we get is amazing in comparison to that. I'm not naming shame the authority, but also the spirit with which people participate and the ability for members to see the bigger picture in Northumberland is absolutely amazing. So I just thank you for all of your comments and input into Schools Forum, and wish everyone a very happy Christmas and a nice break when it comes. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you.